Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Galactic engineers laughed at primitive tools. Until the human's vibration found Motherlode. The asteroid designated T-47A floated silently in the void, a jagged rock the size of a small city, lit only by the artificial glow of the Galactic Interact Academy's orbiting examination platform. It spun slowly in the dark vacuum, marked with ancient craters and silvery veins of unknown material glinting beneath its crust. Around it, dozens of sleek spacecraft hovered in precise formation, each belonging to a different alien species participating in the most prestigious test of the academic year, the Galactic Resource Extraction Challenge. Inside the main briefing dome, cadets from across the galaxy gathered in silence, watching as the holographic model of the asteroid rotated above them. The hologram zoomed in, revealing highlighted regions beneath the crust marked in glowing blue. These zones held Xytherium, a crystal so rare it was used only in interstellar engines and galactic-level defense arrays. Extracting it safely was both a scientific and strategic challenge, and this year the Interact Academy had decided to make it the focus of the final exam. As the lights dimmed, a tall, insectoid professor from the Delcaran species stepped forward. She clicked her mandibles for silence before beginning the announcement in perfect galactic standard. Cadets, your task is simple. Within the next 3 hours, you will extract the largest and purest Xytherium sample from asteroid T-47A. You may use any approved tools and methods. Your final score will be based on volume, purity, and resourcefulness. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room. Alien cadets from elite families stood tall in their metallic exosuits or glowing biosuits, many of them connected to personal drones, laser-assisted mining rigs, and AI-powered excavation scanners. Some whispered strategies into translators, others ran final diagnostics on gear worth more than a city's energy grid. In the back corner of the room stood one human cadet, Elijah Monroe. He adjusted the strap of his dusty field backpack and checked the simple tool kit strapped to his belt, a compact geophone, a seismic hammer, a few portable echo sensors, and a field notepad, old school even by Earth standards. Compared to the others, Elijah looked almost laughably under-equipped. He wasn't from a wealthy background, hadn't come with the backing of a corporate empire or a royal house. He was here because he'd passed the tests with pure intellect and field ingenuity. A tall, crystalline alien with shimmering scales approached him from the side and tilted his head. You lost, human. This is a mining exam, not a fossil hunt. Elijah gave a half-smile. Guess I'm in the right place. Then, rocks are rocks, whether they're old or glowing. The crystal and alien scoffed and walked away without another word. Elijah didn't mind, he'd grown used to the mockery, especially in a system where humans were still seen as unpredictable newcomers, hardy, yes, but under-equipped and under-evolved compared to the ancient civilizations around them. As the cadets were teleported in small teams to the asteroid surface, Elijah's boots landed with a soft thud against the regolith. The terrain was rough, broken with sharp metallic shards poking through a layer of dust. In the distance, he could already see alien tech being deployed. Massive tripods unfolded, lasers pierced the ground, and hoverbots began scanning rock layers with pulsating blue lights. Every student looked like a part of a well-oiled industrial machine. Elijah didn't rush. He took a knee, pulled out his sensor, and pressed the tip against a nearby rock. With a twist of a dial, he tapped lightly with his hammer and listened to the vibration response. The tone was too hollow, probably air pockets or weak mineral deposits. He moved a few meters further, testing again. A dull echo meant dense rock, still not what he was looking for. The rest of the students scattered quickly, claiming zones and drilling with precision from above. It looked like a synchronized ballet of technology, except for one lone figure who simply walked, tapped, listened, and made pencil marks in a notebook. Elijah knew that Xytherium had a unique vibrational response, sharp but with a smooth decay. It didn't behave like a regular crystal, it absorbed some of the seismic energy and released a faint echo that could be felt more than heard. Most scanners didn't even detect it unless the vein was already exposed, but the human had read enough geological journals from early Earth history to believe in a method that predated technology itself, tactile resonance. He pressed his palm against the rock, closed his eyes, and struck lightly. The vibration traveled up his arm and into his chest, too flat, no shimmer. He moved to another location, tap, dull. He moved again. Meanwhile, a group of students from the Yeltari race had already begun extracting small zitherium shards using nanite injection, microscopic bots that crawled through the cracks and isolated material at the molecular level. The bots returned with fragments no bigger than fingernails, but already the cadets were cheering. Elijah ignored the cheers and struck the rock again. This time, pausing, something felt different. The echo wasn't sharp, but it wasn't dull either. It vibrated in a peculiar pattern, almost like a pulse. He narrowed his eyes and tapped again, this time at a different angle. The response was faint but steady, not the usual mineral. He placed a geophone sensor on the surface, adjusted the filter, and struck the rock once more. A small line appeared on the analog display, then another. The signature was familiar, he'd seen it during training simulations that used artificial zitherium for calibration. He scribbled a quick note, possible anomaly. Verify. From behind, he heard someone laugh. A squat alien with rotating eye lenses hovered near on a transport disc. You're drawing lines on paper, human. Do you want crayons next? Elijah smiled without turning. Sure, if you're done with your toy drill, the alien hissed and zipped away. Elijah stood, brushing off dust, and marked a wide circle on the ground with his boot. He knelt again, pressing 3 sensors in a triangle around the suspected point. One more strike, this time the echo vibrated evenly across all 3 points. That was it, he was standing above something big, maybe not the biggest vein, but purer than the broken shards being scavenged elsewhere. He closed his notepad and sat on the rock, letting others exhaust themselves in chaos and machinery. Time was on his side. Elijah remained seated on the jagged rock, calmly observing the frenzy unfolding across the asteroid's uneven terrain. The timer embedded in his wrist panel silently ticked down, 2 hours and 17 minutes remained, while others pushed deeper and deeper into the asteroid's crust. He stayed at the surface, refining the vibration readings with careful taps and sensor adjustments. The same anomaly he had detected earlier was now presenting subtle directional variance, which meant only one thing: the Zitherium formation beneath him wasn't just a cluster, it was a vein, likely stretching laterally beneath the surface. Far to the left, a trio of Chiron cadets operated a mining rig the size of a shuttle. The noise of rotating drills echoed faintly across the vacuum, muffled only by the filters in Elijah's helmet. The Chiron team had erected a temporary command tower with live telemetry, high-resolution subterranean scans, and a cloud of floating mining drones. Red dots blinked on their shared display as the machines tagged mineral-rich pockets. One of the cadets sparked a command, and a drone immediately began melting a tunnel with a precision plasma beam. Elijah watched for a moment. The Chiron weren't wasting time. Their efficiency was impressive, and their yield looked promising. Still, he turned back to his own tools. His task was different, not a race for volume, but for insight. He pressed his ear against the ground, cushioned by the padding of his suit, and struck the surface once more, slightly harder than before, counting the milliseconds between impulse and feedback. The vibration delay revealed a thicker density beneath the first rock layer. He took out his laser chisel, not the strongest tool, but enough to scrape off the top crust. A few minutes of careful work exposed a fibrous mineral web, copper-like in color, with silvery threads branching from a point slightly ahead. He recognized the pattern, a known precursor mineral often found near Zitherium. Its presence confirmed his theory about the orientation of the vein. Now the challenge was to locate the precise entry point without relying on brute force. Elijah stood up and walked 5 meters along the direction the echo had suggested. He planted his boot, then swung his hammer again. The response was tighter, sharper. He nodded and turned his wrist panel to mark the spot. The mapping sensors plotted a 3-dimensional echo pattern. His readings weren't detailed, but they were enough for what he needed. Nearby, an excavation explosion lit up the surface with a blue pulse. A second group of cadets, this time from the aquatic world Venthari, had detonated a small section of rock and were cheering inside their suits. One of the Venthari females pulled out a crystalline fragment and held it up to her visor. Her pale skin shimmered under the reflection of the mineral's glow. Zytherium, though small and chipped, sparked excitement among the group, and others rushed to replicate the method. Within minutes, controlled detonations erupted all around. Microquakes rumbled beneath the asteroid surface, subtle enough to avoid causing structural collapse, but strong enough to unsettle Elijah's readings. He frowned and rechecked his sensors. The wave patterns were now erratic. The resonance he'd spent an hour refining had been scrambled by dozens of nearby shock waves. He crouched again and tapped. This time, nothing happened, only a muddled mess of noise. Frustration tugged at his focus, but he inhaled deeply and reminded himself of something his old Earth geology instructor used to say: noise always fades, wait long enough and truth will hum again. So he waited while the others scrambled for shiny fragments in newly blasted holes. Elijah sat back on his heel and stared up at the blackness above. Stars didn't twinkle here, the vacuum stripped them of their familiar shimmer, they just burned cold and constant. Minutes passed, and the ground settled. He tapped again, a faint tone returned, weak but true, not the same sharp pulse from before, but similar enough to realign his path. He triangulated 3 new points with his sensors, each a meter apart. When he tapped the center point, the wave echoed cleanly through all 3 in perfect symmetry. The vein was below, 8 m long and no more than 3 m deep. Instead of switching to a power drill, Elijah reached for his collapsible mining pick. It was a simple tool by Galactic standards, but it was designed for precision and control. He began chipping away slowly, breaking only the upper layers of rock. Each swing was calculated, the angle adjusted to prevent shattering any hidden Zytherium beneath. Half an hour passed, sweat built inside his helmet and his arms ached from the steady repetition. But then his pick struck something that didn't give. He paused, adjusted his light, and scraped away the dust with his gloved fingers. There it was, a thin thread of glowing silver, a strand like lightning through the exposed crack. It wasn't large, but it wasn't fragmented either. It was a continuous vein, unbroken, exactly what he needed. He didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, he marked the coordinates and prepared the containment frame. Zytherium was reactive under certain conditions. Pulling it without stabilizing the immediate area could cause internal shattering or even volatile energy feedback. Elijah opened a kit with small carbon fiber shields and gently secured the perimeter. He then inserted 2 thermal dampeners on each side of the vein to reduce stress and began brushing away the surrounding material as he worked. As he worked, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Another student had approached, a short Iranian male with metallic wings folded across his back, hovering silently, observing Elijah's work. "You found something," the Abranian said through the open comm line. Elijah didn't look up. "Maybe," he replied. The Abranian tilted his head, the small feathers on his neck shifting slightly. "You're not using a scanner, no resonance pulse, no shielding gel, just," he paused. "Manual extraction." Elijah finally turned his head. "Is that a problem?" The Abranian gave a soft, clipped laugh. "It's inefficient but impressive." Without waiting for a reply, the Abranian activated his boots and lifted off into the air, disappearing toward another zone. Elijah returned to his work. The vein was now partially exposed, still intact, still stable. He didn't need more time to extract it, he just needed to expand the cavity enough to retrieve a full segment without fracture. His hands moved quickly but deliberately, scraping, measuring, and realigning the frame with every layer removed. A warning beep echoed through his wrist panel, 1 hour remaining. He glanced up and saw a cloud of robotic diggers lifting heavy debris in the distance. Someone had brought in a graviton pylon to lift entire slabs at once. It was overkill but effective. Several cadets gathered near the extracted fragments, already celebrating. Elijah looked back at his single, shimmering vein. It was modest in appearance, quiet even, but if his calculations were correct, it would register as one of the purest samples extracted on record. More importantly, it had been found through understanding, not force. He wasn't trying to win through spectacle, he was trying to win through science. He smiled faintly and began preparing the crystal for containment. A jagged crack expanded beneath Elijah's careful chisel, revealing more of the shimmering vein embedded in the rock. The zithrum was no longer a single glimmer, it curved and snaked downward like the root of some ancient buried tree. He leaned closer, his helmet light adjusted to a low warmth, preserving the crystal's integrity while he traced its path. The structural lines confirmed what his vibration mapping had hinted at earlier. The vein continued for several meters, shallow in depth but wide in volume. Most importantly, it remained unbroken. He anchored the containment frame deeper, adjusting the stabilization clamps with gentle precision. The carbon fiber brackets clicked softly into place. From his toolkit, he selected a micro blade and began carving around the vein's edges, taking special care not to disturb the crystalline lattice. The energy signature of Xytherium was sensitive to pressure and thermal flux. One careless move could destabilize the entire formation, but Elijah's hands remained steady, his breathing calm despite the countdown ticking on his wrist panel, 43 minutes remaining. Static crackled in his ear as the instructor's voice echoed across the channel, "Update your progress, markers. All cadets are required to log yield estimation within the next 5 minutes." Elijah activated the scanner embedded in his left glove and hovered it above the exposed zithrum. The readings glowed in soft green, density high, purity 97%, energy capacity above expected threshold. He entered the data into his log without a word, no fanfare, no declaration, just facts. He wasn't interested in attention, he only wanted the work to speak for itself. He secured the readings, then sat back on his heel to stretch his arms for a brief moment. His muscles ached from hours of manual effort, but it was the satisfying kind of ache, the kind that confirmed something real had been achieved. He wiped the condensation from inside his visor with a flick of his wrist and prepared to detach the segment. But before he could begin, a flash of violet light erupted from the ridge above. He turned sharply, shielding his eyes with one arm. A loud cheer followed through the comms. Somewhere beyond the haze, a dozen cadets stood proudly around a mechanical hauler lifting a massive slab of mineral-encrusted rock. It spun slowly in the anti-grav field, rotating for display. The reflective surface of the rock sparkled, and at its center glowed a cluster of Xytherium. It wasn't uniform, fractured with spiderweb cracks, but it was large, much larger than anything Elijah had seen extracted so far. The voice of the Kyler team leader cut through the shared channel, confirmed, high-density Xytherium deposit, 17 shards identified within one extraction, energy rating averaged at 72%. Logging success. Dozens of alien students began reacting, some clapped, others muttered praise or questions. The faculty orbiting the asteroid even sent a formal scan drone to verify the sample. The camera lens blinked red and blue as it hovered above the glowing mass. Elijah watched silently, the crystal in his hand, still untouched from the surface. The Chilar sample looked impressive, commanding in size and color, but he knew the truth. He'd seen similar shards before, during lab simulations, when Xytherium fractured its internal charge. Larger pieces didn't necessarily mean better. In fact, uncontrolled fractures reduced the energy purity and could make containment hazardous. Still, public opinion had already shifted. The Chiron team were being hailed as likely winners. Even the instructors began praising the speed and coordination of their operation. Elijah turned back to his crystal. It didn't matter what others thought, not yet. The final judgment would be based on measurable criteria. He reminded himself of that as he resumed his work. The distraction had cost him valuable time, and the window for extraction was closing fast. He reached for the reinforced capture tray and carefully slid it beneath the vein. The tray's insulation activated automatically, forming a low-energy stasis field. A soft hum vibrated through his gloves as the crystal detached from the rock. He caught the section with both hands and placed it into the center of the tray, anchoring it with magnetic stabilizers. The crystal pulsed once, soft blue light glowing from within, but remained whole. With the tray sealed, he stood up and looked across the terrain once more. The Chillerans were now gathering smaller fragments from the blast zone, stacking them into auxiliary containment boxes. Another alien team, the Venthari group, had uncovered a secondary cache and were rapidly deploying harvest drones to scoop the surrounding debris. The asteroid's surface had transformed into a war zone of wires, drills, and digging limbs, but Elijah stood alone, his zone untouched, undisturbed, a clean site with a single sample. "Cadets," the instructor's voice called out again, 15 minutes remain. Return to designated delivery pads with your final samples, no further excavation permitted past the final mark. Elijah checked his coordinates, adjusted the pressure locks on his sample tray, and began the walk toward his assigned platform. He didn't rush, his footsteps were measured and careful. The asteroid's uneven surface wasn't forgiving, and the last thing he needed now was a slip or jolt that might damage the vein. As he climbed a shallow incline leading toward the delivery zone, he passed a group of students from the Assuran delegation. One of them, a live male with glowing veins under his skin, turned his head and stared at Elijah's modest tray. "That's it?" the Assurian asked. "Just one piece." Elijah nodded once. "One is enough." The Assurian laughed and continued loading his own cargo unit, which bulged with various mineral samples of mixed colors and textures. Elijah kept walking. He reached the delivery pad and placed his tray onto the calibration dock. The stasis field synced with the Academy's scanner, and a beam of light swept across the surface of the Zithrum. Data streamed onto the instructor's terminal in orbit. Volume, weight, energy density, and crystalline integrity were all measured with clinical precision. A moment later, a notification flashed on his wrist panel: sample verified, purity 96.7%, structural cohesion 100%, energy potential 89%, capacity fracture, none. Elijah allowed himself a quiet breath of satisfaction. It was not just the numbers, it was what they meant. No other cadet, despite their gear and firepower, had submitted a crystal without fractures. His sample was a rarity, not just in value, but in craftsmanship. Still, the attention remained on the Chiron team. One of the instructors had personally descended to examine their largest fragment. A small audience had gathered around, whispering estimates and debating the final rankings from a distance. Elijah could hear phrases like largest mass found, visible saturation, and top percentile energy. He stood alone at the edge of the platform, watching as the other students celebrated. A quiet voice came through the private comm line, his supervisor, Professor Inari, speaking from orbit. "Elijah," she said, her voice low but firm, "don't be distracted. The evaluation algorithm is impartial, let the numbers speak." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Understood." "Good," she said, "and well done. Regardless of the outcome, your methodology will be logged for academic review. It's already causing discussion among the staff." The channel clicked off, and Elijah looked up at the stars once more. The light from the surrounding ships illuminated the asteroid, now casting long shadows that shifted across the mining zone. Some cadets waved flags of their home worlds, others posed for victory photos. And yet, despite the noise, a quiet tension hovered in the vacuum. One final breath before the results would be announced. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment and let the silence settle. He had done all he could, the rest was out of his hands. A low vibration rolled beneath his boots as the scanning platform beneath his sample finished its final diagnostics. A soft mechanical chime signaled that the evaluation had been submitted to the Galactic Inter-Academy's central system. The crystal tray before him was now sealed under a transparent containment dome, suspended within a microgravity field to preserve its structure during transfer. Elijah stepped back, giving the automated arm clearance to lift the sample into the hover pod, which would deliver it to the judge's chamber in orbit. He watched it rise slowly, rotating midair as the blue sheen of Xytherium flickered across its flawless surface. Though his face remained impassive, something stirred behind his eyes, an ember of anticipation, the kind that comes not from arrogance but from certainty rooted in effort. He had earned this moment, every chisel, every echo, every calculation had converged into the glowing artifact now floating skyward. A sudden cheer burst from across the ridge. Another team had arrived late to the platform, hauling a bulky slab of mineral-laced rock with two mag haulers working in tandem. Dust and sparks trailed behind as the haulers strained to keep balance. One of the instructors rushed to assist, calling over a drone for emergency stabilization. The slab was awkwardly shaped and visibly fractured, with small shards of Xytherium embedded between its layers. It lacked the purity of Elijah's sample, but it compensated in volume. The team leader, a tall, female cadet from the crystalline race of Serathon, stepped forward and made a sharp gesture. The slab was scanned with urgency, and the screen lit up with initial readings from where Elijah stood. The results were partially obscured, but he caught glimpses: low purity, multiple structural faults, energy capacity moderate. Still, the crowd around her clapped enthusiastically. Her sample size alone was enough to impress. Elijah turned away and began walking toward the gathering point where all cadets were instructed to wait for final deliberations. The mining field behind him was quieter now, only a few teams remained at their excavation zones, making last-minute adjustments or packing up failed equipment. Many stood with arms crossed, whispering among themselves, casting glances at the ranking screen mounted above the assembly tower. He reached the observation deck and leaned against the railing. From this elevated position, the asteroid's jagged terrain stretched below like a maze of scars and effort. He could see the impact zones, the shattered craters, and the organized chaos left behind by the technologically dominant races, but none of it stirred regret. His mind remained anchored to the clear resonance of the Xytherium vein he had uncovered, untouched by drones, unfazed by shock waves, revealed only by patience and sound. The sky darkened as the massive orbital dome lowered its blast shield, initiating the formal analysis phase. A narrow beam of golden light shot down from the dome's heart and scanned each sample container suspended below. The light pulsed once per crystal, absorbing the data directly into the main frame. An authoritative voice echoed through the asteroid's thin atmosphere. It belonged to the head examiner, an elder from the Qualary species known for her rigid impartiality and flawless memory. "Cadets," she said, "your submissions have been received. The final evaluations are underway, stand by for ranking." A holographic screen materialized above the crowd as names and sample statistics began to populate the board. Murmurs turned into gasps. Most students scanned the list for their own results, measuring themselves against the anticipated leaders. The Kyler team were listed among the top 5, the Sarathian slab, despite its size, landed in 8th place due to its fragility. But it was the top 3 names that drew the loudest reactions. 3rd place, Venthari Team 2, sample purity 73%, yield efficiency 80%, stability 68%. 2nd place, Kyloan Team 1, sample purity 79%, yield efficiency 87%, stability 74%. 1st place, Elijah Monroe, sample purity 96.7%, yield efficiency 91%, stability 100%. Silence spread across the ridge like a falling curtain. Then, disbelief whispers erupted into arguments. One cadet loudly questioned the scan parameters, another accused the system of favoring novelty over tradition. The Sarathian team leader furrowed her crystal-studded brow and approached an instructor with a protest. Elijah remained where he stood. He didn't gloat, he didn't react. He simply watched as his name glowed at the top of the list, highlighted with a blue ring denoting maximum stability, a marker rarely awarded in the test's history. A second announcement followed: the Academy Council confirms the result. First position is awarded to Cadet Elijah Monroe of Earth. Your extraction method has been recorded and submitted to the scientific archives for exceptional field innovation. Professor Inari's voice came through his private comm again, quieter this time. tinged with something close to admiration. "You made a few enemies today," she said, "but more importantly, you earned their respect." Elijah responded softly, "They'll forget the method, but maybe they'll remember the crystal." She chuckled. "Unlikely. The council has already scheduled a review session to discuss incorporating your approach into next year's curriculum." "Congratulations, Elijah, you've shifted a tradition that stood for 200 cycles." The calm line went silent. Soon, one of the judges arrived in a gleaming hover pod and motioned for Elijah to approach the recognition dais. He walked slowly, aware of every gaze following him. Some looked away as he passed, unwilling to acknowledge his success, others stared with a mixture of awe and resentment, but one or two nodded, small, respectful gestures from those who understood what had really occurred. He stepped onto the platform. The judge, a dark-skinned humanoid with swirling tattoos along his jawline, extended a slender crystal rod. It pulsed once and then embedded the official mark into Elijah's chest plate, a shimmering crest of the Inter-Academy bearing his name and score, the youngest cadet to win with analog methodology. The judge said, his voice amplified for all to hear, "Proof that knowledge, not tools, defines mastery." The platform rotated once, giving every student a full view of the ceremony. Elijah stood tall, not out of pride, but because he had nothing to hide. He had come with less but left with more. As the ceremony concluded, cadets were dismissed in staggered groups. Elijah descended the Ds and moved to the landing zone, where the transport shuttles were now preparing for return. He noticed the crystalline alien who had mocked him earlier, standing off to the side, arms crossed. Their eyes met briefly, no words were exchanged, but the alien gave a slow nod. It wasn't friendly, but it was real. Elijah boarded his shuttle and took a seat by the observation window. The asteroid grew smaller as the craft lifted, retreating from the mining zone. His reflection shimmered faintly against the glass, distorted by the stars beyond. In his mind, the hammer strike still echoed, not as noise, but as music. Each one had led him here, and as the stars drifted into motion, he let his eyes close, not in exhaustion but in quiet fulfillment. The shuttle carrying Elijah drifted silently toward the orbiting campus station, its engines pulsing with a soft, rhythmic hum. Through the window beside him, the asteroid T-47A was now no more than a distant shape, scarred, mined, and hollow in places, yet still magnificent in its raw, untouched regions. He watched it disappear into the stars, not with detachment but with the calm of someone who had completed something meaningful. His fingers remained loosely clasped in his lap, his shoulders relaxed. The journey up hadn't changed the weight of the moment, it had simply carried him further from the noise below. When the shuttle docked with the station, he stepped out into the wide, bright atrium of the student arrival bay. The walls shimmered with soft blues and greens, designed to soothe minds tense from testing. Other cadets were already arriving, their chatter a mix of disappointment, excitement, and quiet reevaluation. Elijah said nothing as he passed through them. He carried no trophy, his presence did not demand attention. Yet, wherever he walked, the conversations dimmed just slightly. Professor Inari waited at the end of the corridor. She stood with her arms crossed, a faint smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. She didn't speak at first, instead, she scanned him with her eyes as if confirming that he hadn't changed since leaving the surface. He met her gaze and nodded once. "Not bad," she finally said. He gave a small shrug. "Did my best." She turned and motioned for him to follow her. Together, they walked through the station's upper corridor toward the observation chamber. The hallway was quiet, lined with portraits of historic graduates, some legendary scientists, others political leaders or explorers, who had once sat in the same lecture halls. The chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the Council of Evaluation awaited. 3 judges, each from a different quadrant of the galaxy, sat around a circular platform displaying a holographic reconstruction of the mining test. The floating image showed a simulated version of the asteroid surface, overlaid with activity data points of impact, drill paths, energy output, and the final position of each recovered crystal. The central judge, a wiry humanoid with crystalline implants across his temples, tapped the display to freeze it. Elijah Monroe, he began, your results have been reviewed, your methods analyzed, and your final extraction formally archived. Before we finalize our report, we wish to ask you something. Elijah stepped forward, his voice even. Yes, sir. Why didn't you use any of the standard gear provided? You had full access to advanced mining arrays, you used none of it. He paused, not out of hesitation, but to weigh the most direct way to speak truthfully, because it would have been louder than the asteroid itself. I didn't want to conquer the rock, I wanted to hear what it was hiding. The second judge, a reptilian female with luminous scales, narrowed her eyes slightly. You're saying the others failed because of noise, not failure. I clarified, Elijah said, but misdirection, they looked for what the scanners could show them. I looked for what the vibrations couldn't hide. Silence followed, heavy, but not cold. The third judge leaned forward, his voice lower than the others. We've seen this exam 100 times, no one's ever scored full structural cohesion. That level of extraction isn't supposed to be possible with manual tools. Elijah's lips tugged into a faint smile. Maybe it wasn't the tools, maybe it was how they were used. The judges exchanged glances. A few keystrokes later, a final document shimmered into projection above them. The official evaluation methodology, recognized for exceptional originality and scientific merit, named him as the candidate to receive honors distinction and method submission to the Central Archive of Applied Field Sciences. Professor Inari placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but proud. You just rewrote a part of the curriculum, she said. He nodded, his mind already moving beyond the accolades. While others might celebrate rankings or medals, he felt the true reward settle deeper, something quieter, something that didn't sparkle under artificial light. It was the sense that a forgotten way of thinking had resurfaced, proven relevant once again. Later that evening, he returned to his quarters, still dressed in his suit, which now seemed dusty with asteroid grit. He opened the small satchel he had carried during the mission and pulled out the only item he had kept for himself, a tiny, uncharged shard of rock, unrelated to Cytherium but smooth, clean, and naturally split into two perfect halves. He placed it on the table beside his bed. A soft chime from his console alerted him to a stream of incoming messages. Some were from fellow cadets, offering congratulations laced with disbelief, others came from planetary science departments asking for details on his technique. But one message stood out, a direct request from the Interstellar Council's Department of Resource Sustainability, inviting him to join a research team exploring non-invasive mining alternatives on pre-colonial planets. He stared at the invitation for a long moment, then pressed accept. The next morning, he walked through the campus halls with a different rhythm, not faster, not more confident, but more rooted. Students who had never spoken to him before nodded or made space as he passed. Some looked curious, others thoughtful, no one laughed this time. He entered the lab where next year's cadets would soon begin training. At the back of the room sat an unused shelf labeled, obsolete tools. Among the dust-covered objects was a hammer nearly identical to the one he had used. He picked it up and turned it over in his hand. The grip was worn smooth, the head chipped, yet it still felt perfectly balanced. With a slight smile, he placed it on the front display table alongside a digital panel. He activated the panel with a few swift taps, the screen lit up with a message that read, "Precision begins with perception, listen before you strike." Then he left the room, the door closing quietly behind him.